Morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. So I'm Ian Saldana. I'm faculty here in the Department of Epidemiology and with the Center for Clinical Trials and Evidence Synthesis. I wanted to say how excited we are to have our speaker here this morning. She's Dr. Ida Sim. She is professor of medicine at the University of California, San Francisco, where she co-directs the biomedical informatics at that university's Clinical and Translational Sciences Institute. And she is the co-founder and principal clinical data scientist of Open M Health, which I'm sure some of you have heard of, if not all of you. It's a platform that allows patients to harmonize and manage their disparate sources of data. And by way of background, Dr. Sim got her MD at Stanford University, after which she went over to Mass General Hospital in Boston to get her residency in internal medicine. And then she went back to Stanford to get a PhD in medical informatics. She has numerous honors to her name, but I'm just going to name three. She is a fellow of the American College of Medical Informatics. She is a recipient of a leadership award from the American Medical Informatics Association, and she's an elected member of the American Society of Clinical Investigation. As far as her achievements specific to clinical trials and evidence synthesis go, she was the founding project coordinator at WHO's ICTRP program, which stands for the International Clinical Trials Registry Platform. And most of us in the room would recognize that platform because it's one of the main sort of overarching of different registers for clinical trials. As part of that role, she came up with the common 20-item trial registration data set that is in use across registers around the world today. She served on the Institute of Medicine, that's the IOM Committee on Strategies of Responsive Sharing of Clinical Trial Data. And those of us who go to Cochrane Colloquium might remember her from 3 years ago, or is it 2 years ago now, where she gave the third annual Cochrane lecture at the Cochrane Colloquium in Vienna. And she has collaborated with some folks here. She currently collaborates with us on a project related to data abstraction during systematic reviews. I know some in the room have participated in that trial. She's a co-investigator of that study as well. As far as today's topic goes, she'll be talking about clinical trial results reporting in the age of big data. I think this will be a fascinating topic. It's one that as she said, she wants it to be interactive and she wants a discussion out of this. She'll be focusing on Vivli, which is a platform for sharing clinical trial data, and she wants to explore with us what that might mean for evidence synthesis efforts as well. All right, so without further ado, let's all welcome Dr. Ida Sim.
Thanks, Ian. Is this on? People can hear? Do we have a little clicker or not a little clicker? Okay, I can just...
Put it a little bit closer to you.
Then sometimes it gets this sort of feedback. Okay, is that all right? I'll just project. All right. Thanks, Ian. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I was just saying that this is actually the first time I've ever been to Hopkins, which is surprising, but I'm glad to have corrected that error by being here now. So trial registration, the work that I did at the World Health Organization for the 20 data items in the global policy on trial registration was over 10 years ago now, which is amazing. And while there's still a lot of work to do in trial registration, for sure, we've always known trial registration was sort of just one side of the coin, right? Once you have the trial registered, at some point you want the results. And as it took years and years to get people to even think about trial registration, right? A great credit to Kay Dickerson to have pushed for trial registration, for decades, right, before it became reality. So too does results reporting require a lot of years to push for. So we're now in the age of clinical trial results reporting, and because of the way that our world is going with connected technologies and big data and so forth, kind of maybe rephrases this clinical trial result sharing, so we get out of this notion of reporting to a journal, right? Because I think it's going to be far more beyond that, and talk about what that means today. And I think it's fair and good for us to be able to say that the issue is no longer whether to share clinical trial data, but what specific data share, what time, and under what conditions. So this was from the Institute of Medicine. This shouldn't be 2017. It was 2015 that we came up with. This is the IOM committee that I was on, and we really did feel, talking to academics and industry, that it was a question of how to share. It wasn't whether to share at the very first cut. So that opened up some space for discussion. And certainly we've made a lot more strides in the reporting of summary level data. This is just to recap the most recent rules from this is the final rule, right, for clinical trials registration at clinicaltrials.gov. So for trials that ended, after January 18, 2017, right, these are the things you need to report to clinicaltrials.gov. The participant flow, the baseline characteristics, the summary level results of the primary and secondary outcomes that you declared when you registered your study, right, adverse events, the full protocol, and the statistical analysis plan. Okay, so that's essentially it's all the stuff that you would need to sort of make sense of the study, right? Makes sense. So now this is what is required for clinicaltrials.gov no later than 12 months after the primary completion date, right? So finish your study, you got 12 months to put this into clinicaltrials.gov, and NIH is certainly moving towards making that a condition of further funding that you do this. So we're starting to have both the mechanism and the policies to be pushing for results reporting, results sharing. So this is at the summary level, and of course, how many in the room do meta-analysis, do systematic reviews? Probably a good number. So this is great, right? Right? This is great. Of course, when you have something, you want more. So we would like individual participant level data. How many people do IPD meta-analysis? If you do, is it easy? No, it's not easy. If you had more IPD, would you do more IPD? And those of you who are doing summary meta-analysis, if there were IPD, would you do IPD meta-analysis instead if you had that data? Yes? Not necessarily.
I'm not sure you always need to.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So there's some situations where you would and some where you wouldn't, right? So, and just to be an example of where you might, and this is some sort of pitch that we have for Vivli, for example, that, with the tide of obesity and diabetes, rate of type 2 diabetes in children has gone up a lot. Most of this is due to obesity. My endocrine friends are saying, they're really happy about this GLP-1 agonist class, which can cause weight loss of up to 10%, right, in some patients. And they're thinking about using this in kids, in anticipation of them getting diabetes to manage their obesity. So Eric Bomberg is a pediatric endocrinologist, and he wants to see which children lose weight on GLP-1. Okay, and it turns out that there are 11 trials on GLP-1 agonists, totaling 21,000 patients. And so that's exenatide and liraglutide. And he would like that raw data to find those predictors, and then he wants to verify that in our EHR data at UCSF. Okay, so this is just an example of a kind of analysis that many people want to do with the IPD, and obviously the summary level data doesn't get you there, right? So just an example for why, there are situations where we want the IPD and obviously situations where we wouldn't need to. Obviously, Eric can't do this. The clinical trial data are not routinely shared. And then to pull on the heartstrings, shouldn't the contributions of children and families be widely shared, right? So those are the sort of the kind of moral reasons for sharing. Or if you want to be thinking about research integrity, not so much about clinical care, this report just came out, I think, a couple of days ago from the National Academies that complete sharing of data, models, and code when publicly reporting results is fundamental to research integrity. Obviously, a lot of concern about research integrity, about reproducibility, and sharing is part of what we need to do, to get us to maintain integrity in research. So that's all kind of leading up to, why we'd want to share data, and just to put on a slide, all the good reasons. We know it increases statistical power. That's true for summary level reporting as well, but enabling new discovery, validating studies, and preventing unnecessary repetition of studies. It's really the best use of, the participants' contributions and of society's investment in clinical trials, right? It's to pull that maximum value out. That's the idea anyway, right? So in this whole mix, the IOM committee report came out in early 2015. And then in January of 2016, so about a year after that, the ICMGE came out with this proposed policy for sharing individual participant level data. And this really, came out of a lot of our discussions that we had on the IOM committee, that trials published in ICMJE journals require authors to share with others, and that I put that in quotes because I think it's important to know what they say. To share with others is as vague as that. The de-identified IPD underlying results presented in the article, okay, including the necessary metadata, no later than 6 months after publication. The reason for the first bullet there was, this came up very much in our discussion that, I think that if you're going to make a public claim in an article, then you should back up your public claim. If you're willing to make it, put your data behind it. I think that's just minimum scientific responsibility. Okay, so that's why it was the data underlying the article. We need to talk broadly about just, if you don't publish your data, you still need to share it. But certainly if you make a public claim in an article, you should support it with your data and the necessary metadata to understand that data. No later than 6 months after publication, gigantic fight. Believe me, there were people who wanted it released immediately on publication, and there were ones who were arguing for 2 years. That was the range. Most of the journal editors were off at 1 year plus. Loads of academics, you can imagine, people like you in this room were going for immediately. It was a big fight. So we settled on no later than 6 months. So you could release immediately if you wish, but no later than 6 months. And there was a tremendous pushback even on 6 months. All right. So this policy is not yet in force, because, there's still, resistance. And also because, if they implemented this policy right now, where would you go put your data, right? So there's no infrastructure quite yet. So the ICMJE is about to come up with sort of their next comment on this policy, but for now it's out there and it's pending. Okay. Any comments about this? Do people like this? People think it's a good thing? Yeah.
I wonder who's going to fund us to do the work. Actually, I do clinical trials. We regularly produce de-identified databases and put them in BioLink. But nobody pays us for that.
Does NHLBI not pay you to prepare that?
Now, maybe we need to but you get a $500,000 per year grant limit. Yeah, we can barely do it.
Yeah, so you're getting paid to do the whole thing, and where you choose to put your money, you end up doing whatever you need to do with that money. Yeah.
We choose to put our money to do the clinical trial.
Right. But it's required that you deposit in BioLink, right? Is
Not
it?
necessarily, no. It
No.
depends on the particular trial, but we just regularly do it.
You just regularly do it. Okay.
NHLBI, you've got a place to put it.
Right.
Other institutes, you don't even
You
have
don't.
a place to put it.
Yeah.
Even though, and so then you have this database, which people never ask for, but you say you have it, but then you're responsible for maintaining it.
Right. Yeah. So keep bringing that up because that's an issue we need to solve, right? So this is aspirational. I think it's great. It sort of pushes the bounds out. It's gotten tremendous pushback. Some of you may have read Richard Horton's article in The Lancet. If not, you should read it. It's quite interesting. It was like, no way. So let's say we wanted to do this anyway. Existing IPD data sharing platforms are not enough, okay? And it's not like there aren't any, right? There are, I guess I didn't put the NHLBI BioLink on here, but BioLink from the NHLBI Studies, Immune Tolerance Network, CSDR, some of you know CSDR, right? It's a consortium of 13 pharma companies that have put about 3,000 of their studies available on, this website that you can go search and make requests for and get their data. YODA is a partnership with Johnson & Johnson and Medtronic Studies. This is with Yale, of course. So there are a number of these out there. But it's hard to find. So, the analogy we use is in the old days when you try to find a flight, you would, call your travel agent, or you would, go to one or other website, and now, there's the kayak, right? You just search hundreds of hotel sites or flights online at once. And so it'd be good to have that sort of one-stop shop to look for IPD, because really what you want to be complete in your search, right? Especially for a systematic review, you want to be able to identify the IPD sets. So that's one problem is finding them, right? So databases can share, but no search engine to find a trial data set. That's one problem. The other problem is that databases are siloed by disease. So yes, there's NHLBI for the cardiovascular studies, but then you've got your depression studies here and your cancer studies over here, and I don't think science really works that way anymore. That you want to cross discipline, and that's hard to do when the databases are siloed. Obviously, it's costly to combine data even within databases, let alone across databases, right? And many of the databases are just, it's just a flat file or something, and you just download it, and you're on your own, right? But yet there's a lot more we can do now with analytic technology that really isn't supported by the systems we have right now, which are really focused on sharing. It's really focused on, make a request for this data set and I'll give it to you, as opposed to how do we build a system where we can really do reproducible, reusable science on an ongoing basis efficiently, right? Errol.
Has TRIP shown any interest in this?
What?
TRIP database, have they shown any interest?
TRIP?
Yeah, the UK search engine that searches a whole bunch of data and space resources around the world. So that would seem to be one place where people are used to going.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We haven't looked at that, but we should be a feeder into that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've looked at been in touch with Ben Godaker, of course, from All Trials, and many others. That's not the only reason that existing data sharing platforms are not enough, though. Many researchers who want to share cannot share, right? So to that comment that if you wanted to share and you weren't in a cardiovascular, like where do you go? What do you deposit, and how much does it cost, and what do you need to do, and how do you know it's safe, and all that kind of stuff. It's just nothing for academics, really. Okay. So what the world needs now, a trusted one-stop shop for clinical trial data for all trials worldwide, all diseases, obviously responsive to everyone, friendly, easy to use, and, has transparent and inclusive governance, right? And, this has been recognized for some time, and I remember having been in many, many meetings with loads of Cochrane people as well. From like in between Cochrane meetings, there'll be other meetings where it's like, okay, we got to do this. Someone's got to do it. And the question has always been, well, who should do this? Who can be this group? Do we need one group, or is it multiple groups? And then it was, the WHO ought to do it, and the WHO for various reasons I think is not the right group to do it. And so there was this vacuum, and so nothing happened. Everybody kept waiting for some group to do this. The IOM report came out, and at the same time, a group at Harvard called the Multi-Regional Clinical Trial Center, run by Barbara Beerer, they've been working on clinical trials and clinical trial policy for many years. And they started holding meetings about clinical trial data sharing. And I think it was just a confluence of interest that brought me to the group there. So Barbara has set up this whole group where she's already gotten the trust of pharma and regulators and other industry people. So it was natural to start talking about data sharing. And then I joined as the technical lead. And it was really, so there have been a number of aborted attempts to do this whole Vivli trial bank idea. And I think the reason why we're as far as we are now with Vivli was because it's not a technical play. It is about policy and working with the people whose interests are directly related and directly threatened for clinical trial results sharing. To start with them and then add in the technology has gotten us as far as we have. Chris?
What about the old clinicaltrials.gov?
Yeah, what about the old clinicaltrials.gov? They are not interested to go to IPD.
Really?
Yeah. We have not heard that. I know the WHO is not. I'm the chair of the advisory board. Now I'm on the other. Yeah, I took a big break. Now I'm back at the chair of the advisory board. They're not interested in IPD. IPD is really difficult, as you'll see in a little bit. It's really challenging. And there was no interest in clinicaltrials.gov to do IPD. They've pushed back in other ways. Yeah. So, and I think that's appropriate because I think the registration and summary results is it's a linchpin of the whole system. And focusing on that and being that catalog, I think is really critical. And I do think the sharing of IPD can be separable. So obviously closely related in terms of the metadata and stuff like that. And, we do talk to NLM and Deb Zarian, of course, about this. So we started Vivli. Vivli stands for, I'm not going to try it. It's a combination of Greek terms. Vivli, the Library of Life, Bibliothèque, and Vivli. So I like that, the Library of Life. It is now a 501c3 nonprofit. Based in Massachusetts. We officially got our 501c3 in mid-March. We have a board of directors, as you see here, representation from industry, representation from one of our main funders, the Laura and John Arnold Foundation. Sharon Terry, some of you may know, is a very, very strong patient advocate. And then it's Barbara and me and Rebecca Lee, the executive director of MRCT, and Mark Barnes, who's a lawyer and also part of MRCT. So while this project came out of Harvard MRCT, it is an independent organization. It's neutral. And the distinction between the entity and the platform being a user-friendly, secure, state-of-the-art, blah, blah, data sharing platform, serving the international community. So I'll go a little bit more in depth about the platform itself. Obviously this has been a product of a whole lot of phone calls, basically. A lot of stakeholders from multiple directions, of course. And again, this is building on collaborations that MRCT has built out over many, many years. And just to note that our supporters so far have included these as listed here, and the volunteers of many, many, many people. Pharma has been very supportive, actually, I would say, on the whole. Obviously, pockets of resistance, but, willing to talk. I would say in general, actually, it's academics who are more recalcitrant. Are you surprised? You guys are actually surprised? So in trial registration, pharma was the recalcitrant one. Actually, academics weren't even, it was just too much to think about. But pharma was really, really, really resistant to registration. But now with trial results sharing, pharma has already done that, right? With CSDR, with Yoda, they've already put money into it. They want to see it more. They want academics to be part of it. They want to get at the data. And academics, by contrast, are like, no way in hell you're going to get my data. I'm going to go to my grave with my data. So it's culturally, it's very, very interesting. Our big fight is going to be with academia, I think. Obviously benefits multiple stakeholders. I'll just call out for us, for biomedical researchers, one-stop shop, of course, and for funders, policymakers, and journals like ICMJE, this would be the place to say, you go deposit your data over at Vivli. Okay, so that's actually kind of what's been missing for ICMJE, and I know they were saying, okay, can you get Vivli done like this year so that we can come up with a policy and then everyone can use Vivli? It's like, well, we're not ready yet. So I think it's sort of a timing issue. As we roll out, then I think the ICMJE can come up with their policy. That's the idea. So Vivli is, we think of it as a three-part solution, right? That it's the independent nonprofit that brings together multiple stakeholders in a trusted and neutral way. That's critically important. because the pharma companies need to know that not one is being preferred over the other. Same with academics. It's got to be transparent, shared governance, very, very critical. A lot of the work, as you know, in informatics is about policies and the incentives that support the appropriate use of the platform, and then of course technically the data sharing platform itself supporting search, connect, and share. So we'll go into each of that as a bit. Any comments about sort of how we got to Vivli where we are?
Question. So how would the pharmaceutical companies view Vivli as different from CSDR?
Great question. And they just had a meeting about this. So we've been talking to them a long time. So CSDR is 13 different companies, and they all have different perspectives. Some of them want to share more, some of them want to share less. CSDR has a search interface that's not all that robust, I would say. People make search requests to CSDR, which are adjudicated by the Wellcome Trust. And then when data is shared, it's shared in the SaaS platform. And when you get your data from the SaaS platform, you can't combine it with other data, and it's very hard to use. And so people tend to not be very happy with it, with the user experience.
You mean SaaS as in program SaaS or SaaS as in software as a service?
Software as a service, yeah. It's also very expensive for them. And it serves the needs for having a place to say they share. So I think to that extent it is, similar to what we're doing. We are offering more in the computational analytic components and richer search and more precise search. And so we very much want to work with CSDR. There's some functionalities that may overlap. And so the companies, we're right in the point now of saying, well, how did they deploy their resources? How would they migrate to Vivli? All those kinds of issues, that there are legacy systems, and, how would people move over? Those are the issues. So stepping through what Vivli is, so we have like CSDR, as you see down here, a mix of 13 companies. Yoda is Johnson & Johnson and Medtronic. There are other platforms like Warren and BioLink and so forth. And then Vivli itself will also be holding IPD. So the notion is that we will have metadata on all the studies that are available in Vivli will be described in a structured fashion by their PICO, right? By their participant, intervention, comparison, and outcome. And it would be more complete and more precise, more complete, more accurate, than many others, including clinicaltrials.gov. So we have enhanced metadata for more precise searching, a centralized search portal, right? So you can just come and search across, all the sites. This is the kayak view of it. That doesn't require any sign in. If you want to make a request, you need to sign in, log in, and then the request goes to a independent review panel. Vivli will probably not manage our own review panel right off the front. Work with maybe Wellcome, with Yoda. There are other examples that we could work with. We might in the end have our own IRP. It just depends on what all the partners wish. But for the user, you should just fill in one request form, and it gets routed over, and then there's a review process, and then you're either allowed or not allowed, right, to get access to the data. If you are allowed access to the data, then you get this data put into a secure virtual machine where you can then combine data from across different repositories. Okay, and the reason for that is that many of the companies did not want to put their IPD on Vivli. They wanted to hold on to it. And yet, lots of people, the whole point of this is to be able to combine data across different data sources. So they said, okay, well, first of all, we tried the federated query thing. Fine, you keep your data where you are. We'll send the computation to the data. Okay, so we had this whole model, you guys can imagine, where it was like, okay, we're going to federate the query out. But then looking at it, it was like, you're not going to be able to ask very much, really. Secure federated queries, just not at the level you can run counts, certainly. You can run regressions, but there's a limit to the kind of analysis you can do. in a secure federated fashion. So no, we really do need to bring the data all together in one place. But then how do we deal with the companies who don't want to give their data out? So that one went round and round. And then they said, well, it's okay if you had a secure virtual machine, which means Vivli would spin up, just this sort of temporary space. Data will come in from, let's say, from CSDR, which CSDR itself doesn't have data. It's actually the data is held by the companies themselves. So let's say GSK. GSK would put their data into Vivli's secure virtual machine, which is spun up only for that particular user for that particular research project, right? So they'll use the data with the J&J, with GSK, with, other academic data. And when they're done with the virtual machine, poof, it goes away. Okay? And of course, the data doesn't go away because the data is still over, at GSK's original host, right? And the idea then is once you have that virtual machine, that no other group can get into that virtual machine. Vivli never sees that data, right? We just set up that cocoon. And none of the other sponsors can get at others, other companies' data. It's just the requester who has already gone through the review process gets access to that set of data for that purpose, and then it's destroyed. Okay, get the notion of a secure virtual machine?
We have, that's our environment today.
Yeah.
Composers, data from.
So it's it's a standard thing in IT. It can be done. I was a little surprised, perhaps, that companies were willing to do that because, in a sense, if you have a secure virtual machine and you see the data, you can't just sit there and take pictures of the screen, right? And then in the end, you've gotten all the data out, right? So in terms of security, it's kind of partway there, but certainly it's not foolproof by any means, right? But it was good enough. People are happy with it. Pharma's done this before. I suspect academics would be fine with it also. So that's the model by where we can satisfy both the needs of companies to hold on to their data and have control, and also allow people to combine data together. And it's this virtual machine thing which is the most different from CSDR, right? Because then people find, oh, well, now we can have more value because now we can combine across data sets. Yeah.
So earlier you said when we publish our results from a clinical trial, we should have our database available within 6 months. So somebody publishes these results, which could even be more impactful, and the data's not available for reanalysis for somebody to replicate?
So what we're working on here is the platform to share the data, the policies that direct whether you do or don't, or when or what. Those policies rest elsewhere. The IOM report, we did ask that IPD be shared, I think, within 18 months. So whether you publish or not, your full IPD set should be shared on something like this within 18 months of your completion date. Again, a big fight about 18 months. Is that enough time for you to do your analysis to get published? Maybe your first secondary analysis paper in addition to your main analysis paper. So a lot of fight around that. And then enforcement. Who's going to enforce this? What are the incentives to make people do this?
It wasn't that I was saying that 6 months was too short or too long or whatever, but it seems like then you do this combined analysis based on IPD and you publish it in JAMA, and nobody can replicate that.
Oh,
analysis.
I see.
Because that database is...
So we actually, we haven't quite gotten there yet, but I think there's a strong sentiment that if you use data from this to generate analysis, that your analysis also needs to go back in here. That you should have the same reporting and transparency duties as the primary. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was
saying. Yeah. And that, of course, brings up the issue of tracking data sets and citations and stuff like that, right? But that is part of the bigger vision. Some people push back on that because what if your analysis was really kind of half-assed anyway? Does that go back in there? If you were just exploratory, does everything go back? So there are issues about that as well.
It's not the analysis, it's the access to the IPD of the meta group, right? You're saying You
Yeah.
can't, if you publish a study, you're required to make the IPD available. But if you publish a meta-analysis, that aggregated IPD is destroyed. And it doesn't appear as though you're required to make the IPD of the meta-analysis.
We might. Do you think we should? I mean, we haven't gotten there yet, so
It's only fair.
yeah.
So since that study is built on other stuff, if you've been coherent in the steps of how you got there, you should be able to recreate it. Like
You should be able
Jupyter
to.
Notebook. Is there a lab notebook component to this environment?
Sort of and sort of not. So a little bit of foreshadowing. We're working with Microsoft as our major technical partner, and have brought up the whole issue of scientific workflows. I'm not sure quite yet whether that's part of their Azure platform. I don't think in the fully, built out sense of a scientific workflow. But that's the idea, right? Is that you can trace everything, and there are citations, and then you can reconstitute that basic data set. So we haven't gotten there yet. I think there's a lot of thinking we need to do about, derived data and studies that come on derived data that are then published again and derived again. And actually, any of you who have pointers to how we should be thinking about this would be very welcome. Go ahead.
So I was wondering whether pharmaceutical company could use this IPD data to support their drug application. How about the intellectual copyright?
Yeah, so that's always been the issue about commercial property. So the CSR, it will be part of this, but it will be redacted, right? And so it's up to them to prevent commercially sensitive IP from being put out here. There is and always has been a concern that a company can take IPD and, file in China. That's usually the example. The IOM committee looked into that a lot, and there are a lot of, lawyers who've looked at this. Data has been shared already, and that hasn't really been an issue. And I think that as people share more, their comfort level increases. And I think we're starting to see that. So we used to hear a lot about commercially sensitive property. We hear less about it now. I think the academics, though, have the same issue. Okay. And the academics don't have a set of laws to fall back on. The academics just have free-floating fear about people scooping them and their careers being destroyed. Okay. So that's what we hear when we talk to people. It's just overwhelming fear. Okay, mostly from the senior investigators who have a career to lose. The junior investigators are all about sharing. Yes, well, John and then
So this analytic environment, all the analysis has to occur in the environment. The data can't be exported to some other system. That's the idea.
So the idea there is that that's up to the data holder. The data holder can say, yes, you can download my data, or the data holder can say, no, you can only use it in the virtual machine. We would hope that over time people would let IPD be downloadable. But if you really think about it, when we have massive data sets, do you really want to download it? Do you have the environment to support the kind of analysis you want and be able to use? So if we provide a very rich analytic environment that's user-friendly, you may not want to actually download it onto your little laptop, right?
I was just thinking that, somebody with some new deep learning algorithm that only runs on a certain machine or whatever might want to, this would be great to try that out. And the environment might not support every possible.
Yeah. So we're designing it to support exactly that. And that's part of the reason why it's also different from CSTR. We're not looking at SAS so you can do your t-test kind of thing, right? It's really bringing in all the other analytics that are really available in the cloud now. Yeah, very much. Did you have, yeah.
Yeah, can you comment on how this request process will work and what criteria people will be using to approve or not? And,
Yeah.
To what extent do you think that the approval will just be, this looks like credible science, okay, and to what extent will the review be prescriptive? And...
Yeah. I think it's a very interesting issue, and we don't have final policy on it yet. There are some groups that say you really need to be a credible scientist to even get at this data. So you need to have a statistician on your team. You need to, be a somebody. You need to have a question. You need to have a protocol. Okay? And then there are others who say, well, what if you were a machine learning data scientist, like we talked about last night? And you just think you can grab all the data and, cure cancer, whatever. Is that something we would support? Why are we reviewing these proposals anyway? Well, it's because they're rogue analyses. Somebody can do a horrible analysis and tank my product, right? Or your competitor takes your data and just, does a horrible analysis and tell the world that, vaccines cause autism or, some crazy thing like that, right? So there's a fear of the rogue analysis. There's the fear of inappropriate use. Of course, if you need a statistician on your team, you can always just find a statistician, right? It's not to say they're going to do the right analyses anyway. But I think it's come around to where you should at least say who you are. You should say what your research question is and some kind of protocol. I'm not exactly sure how deep that is, and the rules are not set yet for Vivli. Wellcome Trust has their own, Yoda has their own rules, and maybe we'll just adopt theirs. And that should be publicly declared. Maybe. So if you made a request to Vivli, would you be okay with that request being made public? Maybe you were exploring some really interesting idea. That's going to be your career. Do you think that request should be made public? Maybe later? Should it? What do you think?
NIH proposals are public.
Yeah. So there's a piece that is public. So maybe we should ask that people say what is publicly declarable and then other stuff maybe that they want to not share.
Within 6 months.
Within 6 months. Oh yeah, hopefully we would have adjudicated the result by then, right? So there are all these issues about transparency at every level, right? So we aren't quite that yet, but those are the kinds of discussions that we're having. All the way to just, don't need to request, just go get it, which is the Immune Tolerance Network. That's their approach. Don't care who you are, wherever you just go, give us your email address, boom, you get your data.
What's the business model?
We'll get there. Yeah.
How does patient consent fit into this?
Consent really needs to be made up front. So that's work that MRCT has already done. They've convened multiple, meetings, and they have template documents and things like that. I think once this whole thing sets up with Vivli and ICMJE and NIH and so forth, then people will start knowing that, I'm going to need to share, and so my informed consent needs to say this up front. And then there's template language to do so. And that's part of what we need to do, is to help foster this whole system. So then at the end, we can also host clinical trial data within Vivli, and you will mint DOIs, right? Digital object identifiers, and we'll have citations and, cross references and all that kind of stuff. So, one of the things we wanted to do was to make sure that search is, nice and relevant. And so here it's a natural language processing thing where you just type in what you want to see, and it'll automatically annotate. So named entity recognition, automatic annotation to target vocabularies, and then use that in structured query, right? You can imagine that. So what I'm going to do is hopefully run through some mock-ups. This is the search and request mock-up. Let me see if I could do this. So here, this isn't a live mock-up. This is just, a mock-up. So you type in the query, so donepezil, and it's automatically understood that that's an intervention. Here are the study results and, a bunch of information and, a bunch of graphs. if you maybe can't remember what class of medicine this is, we're just pulling it out from SNOMED. So you say, oh yeah, actually I want any of those cholinesterase inhibitors because, there's also rivastigmine and tacrolimus and so forth that I also want to look for, right? So you don't have to remember it. So it's actually any anticholinesterase drug, and of course, that makes more results. Then maybe you might want to type in actually your full query, again, automatically annotated. And here, actually the machine was wrong, right? We missed dementia. So you can just click on it and say, add that as a condition and refine it.
I mean, if this is not for the public, this is for people who have time to think about what they're asking. So,
I think the public spends a lot of time thinking about what they want to ask too.
right, but the whole reason not to do the faceted queries is that people don't have time, blah, blah, blah. But I think that in an environment like this, I don't see why you shouldn't just say, force them to specify the PICO, because they run up people.
So that's a question about who this interface is for, right? If it is for anybody who wants to get at participant level data, maybe it's a computer scientist, a data scientist, it's people from Google. The PICO thing, you're all familiar with PICO, right? So we showed this to pharma and they were all like, what is that? They couldn't even think in a PICO term. It just could not do it. Okay, so you really need to know your user. So that's why we have the natural language thing. So we put PICO in underneath. I know. We might do sort of a who you are and give you a different interface. We haven't finished it. But it may not help.
No, if somebody's asking this query, trying to get all this really fancy schmancy data, they can't articulate, they can't think about what a population is. That's kind of frightening, isn't it?
It is. But we're trying to be transparent and open, and if they can't come up with a good question, they're not going to get access to the IPD anyway. So this is just an exploratory interface. Anyone can sign in, right? So here we have over 65, and we want to correct that. So you can see that it's corrected. You can also search for additional criteria, right? Location, sponsor, study types. Harold, you see that? That's our study design typology. Yes, study size, active enrolling, blah, blah. You can imagine that, right? So then we've got more stuff in here. We see who the sponsor is. We see, their population, their intervention comparison, sort of real data, clean, accurate data about the structure of the study, which is something, I'm sorry, you still can't really get out of clinicaltrials.gov in a reliable way. We talked about having a quality rating in stars. I think that's just that's going to be really hard to do. So, probably aren't going to do that. But we do want to think about using the community and how do we have ratings and what does that really mean.
You could have links to articles where these data are discussed.
Yes, we're going to have links to basically anything out. So we'll link out to all trials where you can find out their stock reports or whatnot, right? We'll be tapped into the rest of the environment. So you can select some of these studies for request, and then you need to sign in, right? You sign in, and then you can make a request, and you can see that you've requested a bunch, where the data is hosted, who is the sponsor, and the status of the request. And so you have to fill out a data use agreement. You give your research plan, which is, right here, just a bunch of text. Aren't quite sure how detailed that request needs to be yet. We do need to be transparent about the review criteria, right? And then you're told like how long it takes for the, kind of where in the status your request is. And obviously to tell you which request panel that went to. Okay, we haven't quite figured all that out yet. Okay, so then you have successful requests, you have requests that are pending, and then rejected requests, right? So you sort of have your own dashboard, assuming you're submitting a lot of requests. And then here, you've gotten your data, and then you can, browse the data, the full clinical protocol, the statistical analysis plan, or the IPD, right? There's the CSR as well, and that would be redacted. You can read about it. And if you want to use analysis, you launch up this really, really ugly slide, which is not at all what we're going to do. But, you would launch up that secure virtual machine environment. Okay. So that's kind of the search and request one. I want to go on to the submit data, because there are a lot of issues there too. RCT. So here we are submitting. So here you are, you have your data set and you want to submit it to Vivli. So you have to sign in, obviously. And I like the little James Lynn thing here. So you would either drag your data and drop it in there. You could upload it using the standard XML form that some of the industry people are using. You can see the number of requests on your study sets and so forth, right? Again, it's sort of a dashboard notion. So you dragged your final protocol in, it's been submitted to Vivli, then Vivli needs to curate it, right? We need to structure the metadata, we need to annotate the metadata, and there, we're going to use a combined machine-human method. Lots of annotation tools that we have. We've been talking to a number of different partners to do that. And then once that's done, it should come back to the submitter to correct that metadata, make sure we describe your trial accurately. Here you can see, this is work you might have remembered from some of my earlier work, right? It's the trial annotated piece where you have the annotations on the left, you have your protocol on your right, and did we get it right? So you can easily manually fix that. And then here's the created metadata elements. And again, this is of course annotated to the control vocabularies. And then when it's done, it's you select where to host it. And you can allow whether people in the community can correct the annotation. So again, tapping into the crowd to correct the annotation.
You haven't said anything about the adequacy of the identification.
Of what?
De-identification.
Oh, de-identification. So yeah, here it goes. De-identification. Thank you.
Yeah, but so we don't believe in the safe harbor anymore, right?
In what?
We don't believe in the safe harbor.
Right. So this has been. So I think of the data in two forms, right? There's the metadata about your study. That's fine. That's what this first part was. Then we actually don't want your IPD until somebody requests it. So in CSTR, there are about 3,000 something studies in there. Only 10-15% of them ever have a request on them. So we don't want to spend all our effort to your question about preparing the IPD. Why prepare the IPD for sharing if no one's ever going to request it? Okay, there are a lot of trials out there that nobody ever cares about, just you, right? For those that people do request, then we ask for the IPD to be prepared. And for legal reasons, we want only de-identified data, of course. But then who's going to de-identify? And how much is it going to cost? And what is the standard for de-identification? Because we know de-identification isn't really de-identification, right? So what is the legal risk? How do we do it? How do we verify it? How do we audit it? We can have a separate discussion on that. It kind of goes on and on, right? It turns out that maybe technically we can just take all that data and quote unquote encrypt it in a very safe place, and then we don't need to worry about anonymization. Some people are talking about that, but.
And on your virtual environment, it's clear text.
Yes, so we wouldn't get into the virtual environment unless something had been signed. Right, so it's managing that privacy leak risk on Vivli's part. But then if Vivli would share that risk, would take that risk burden, and academics don't need to have that burden, then maybe that's a service. Getting back to business models, so we're looking for things we can provide that we can monetize. Okay, but this is a huge issue: is how to get the data anonymized when we get it and who would do it, okay? In a way that preserves the value of the data for computation. Yeah.
Sorry to de-ask my question.
No, absolutely.
But, so you can provide all the data from a clinical trial, or you can provide the data that's the basis for your publication. Mm-hmm. And those can be quite different. So what's your guidance on that, or how are you going to?
Yeah, there'll be multiple data sets for a study. There may be, in December of this year, you have the data set that supports the publication in JAMA. And then, 6 months later, there's another data set that supports the publication in Annals. And this one is related to that one, and that's actually the same data set. And then 18 months after the completion of the study, the full data set is also released into Vivli. So all of that has to be, linked together. Methods to do that, but that's the idea. It's not just one data set, it's probably multiple data sets per study. So I'm running a little bit out of time here, but great discussion. So somehow we checked that, the anonymization levels are appropriate. And then, then you can sort of get a sense of what your trial looks like when it's all annotated. And I think that's it. So let me get back to the rest of the presentation to get to where we are. So our 3-year development roadmap is that we're planning to build an end-to-end pilot demonstration of the whole chain, the metadata curation, the search, the request, and the analytic platform by the end of 2017, that we would launch Vivli publicly in the first quarter of 2018. Year 2 would be scale up, and year 3 would be, a workable, sustainable business. Initially, covering all trials for any disease area, right, for industry and academia. Reaching out to include genomics data, imaging, sensor data, and by year 3, sort of an ecosystem of established communities, around a set of data sets. So Microsoft is our technical partner. It's been really great working with them so far. They have healthcare is part of what they're very interested in. We are aligned with them on their vision, mission, and values. Strong fit for their cloud and analytics capabilities. And they're very interested in transforming sort of the health and life sciences industry. And it's been good to work with them because they're strategically aligned. It's not a transactional relationship. It's really a strategic partnership. They've brought a lot to the table. So the idea is that, with Vivli, we're doing the scientific research and data sharing pieces. Blue Metal is the interface partner that builds the platform. And in the back is the Azure platform. So Microsoft is contributing cloud credits initially to fund the platform infrastructure because that's not cheap. And we have really not very much idea about how much cloud, services we need, what's the capacity, what's the use, and if we build it, would anybody come? So we don't quite understand that yet. They're providing consulting services right around data privacy, security, and anonymization. We are working with Microsoft Research, so some of these issues edge into the natural language processing, those kinds of things. We're working with them, and we have the highest level executive sponsorship from Microsoft. So that's good because we need that credibility also. But I think this is exciting because it shows us where science can go. I'm not so interested in this data sharing for the data sharing. It's data sharing for the sake of further science, right? So, I'll end there with a discussion. Only 3 minutes left on the clock here. Our business model, very interesting, talking to different groups, really thinking differently about how we do this. And like Google is free. Right? You put your data on Google and they extract value from it and they make money on it. So the question becomes, well, do we charge people to put money on the platform or do we make that free? Then we charge on the back end. So now our general approach is compute will pay for data hosting. So we're going to charge on the compute side and make it really free and easy. In fact, maybe even pay you to put your data in there. Because if you don't have the data in there, the cycle doesn't start, right? So at first it was like, well, we got to charge pharma to put, data on. It's like, well, okay, if you charge them and they don't put the data on, then there's no data, and then there's no, right? But then we said, okay, well, who's going to pay for the analytics? Are scientists going to pay for it? But if you think there's value there, that's where you charge, right? But then what are the pricing models? Right? What is the level of usage? So we don't know. So we're working with a bunch of business people to figure that out. We're working with some theoretical economists on how to think about starting a completely new market in data sharing. What does a market for scientific data sharing look like? So yeah, this has been a fantastically fun project, as you can imagine. So final questions? I know time is up. Back there? Yeah.
So I think you sort of alluded to it, but I'm wondering if the quality of, not necessarily the studies, but the quality of the data, will that be peer reviewed or assessed in any way?
Generally, no. I think what we want to do is allow data to be shared. We would like data to be in SDTM form, which is this format that a lot of the industry people use. Academia doesn't use SDTM. Is it worthwhile to map academic data sets into SCTM? What does that buy us? I'm not sure. I don't know if either of you know whether it's worth it to do that or not. And if we had data quality standards, who would pay for it? Who would review it? Who would pay for it? I think we haven't gotten there. But I know where you're going to, which is I might get access to a bunch of data sets and they're all incredibly messy. Absolutely. Absolutely. So part of what we're doing with Microsoft is they have tools for data mapping and data cleaning. So to what extent can we use those kinds of tools to help with the data mapping and data cleaning process? And I think we talked at dinner last night about how it's really underestimated how hard it is. Absolutely true. So we'll get there when we get there. Okay. But yeah, huge issue.
Odyssey has 130 centers working on it. So how are you going to scoop them?
Do we need to? We don't need to scoop them.
No, what I mean is how are you going to be able to do more than what they're already doing?
Does Odyssey have clinical trial data?
They have much worse than EHR data.
Yeah. Which is even worse. Yeah. So we'll struggle together. Yeah, I think it's complementary. And to the point of, when people want to combine clinical trial data with EHR data, that's kind of like, to me, way out of scope. I mean, we really got to solve our problem.
No, all I meant is that they're worrying about data quality and they're working on methods to do that.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it would be great to use their methods.
Yeah, no, we should definitely look at them and see what commonalities there are. Yeah, but I think we need to get a bunch of data sets and then see what that is and build. Yeah.
All right, I think that's wrap up there. Thanks.